All right, let's do it again. World War III update. The war in Yemen is escalating. St. Petersburg just seen one of the biggest fires in its history, a 700,000 square foot facility up in smoke blanketed the entirety of St. Petersburg in this thick black smoke. They're saying it was an electrical fire, but was it a cyber attack? There also is another major fire with oil tankers. Right now, I believe it's in Epping in the United States. We'll talk about that in just a moment. North Korea has suspended communications with the South. We have a blackout in Rostov-on-Don. This, of course, is the city which has the headquarters of the Southern Command that oversees the Ukrainian operations within Russia. We have Ukraine bombed heavily, and 90% of the missiles apparently hit their targets, and this was an admission by the Ukrainians. Now, this is quite interesting because typically they're saying they're hitting 100% of these, so you know if they're saying that 90% made it through, it's quite possible that all of them made it through. With only a 10% interception rate, has something changed in the equation? We have Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, warning of nuclear conflict. We're going to try to decipher his body language in a presentation that he gave to his constituents, and it does not look good. It appears as though they are truly concerned about a region-wide war that's about to escalate. We have a radiological incident around the Marshall Islands. This is where they used to do nuclear testing. We also have the man who predicted Vladimir Zelensky's coming to power within Ukraine, as well as the Ukraine war, predicting a nuclear war. He has now passed on, but we're going to talk about his other predictions that are eerily prescient. We also have to talk about the Russian election that's coming on March 17th and why I think that they're going to fully mobilize their forces shortly thereafter. We need to talk about China's new war rhetoric now that Taiwan has re-elected their very pro-independence candidate. We have Estonia, who is planning on mining the border with Russia. We have Israel planning on taking over the Egyptian border. We have massive protests around the world, be they in support of the Palestinians or be they in Tel Aviv, where they're protesting the ouster of, or the soon-to-be ouster possibly, of Benjamin Netanyahu. We also have a doomsday clock announcement on the horizon. We have nuclear batteries being created for nuclear-powered robots. Terminator hunter killers, you heard it here first. And forever drones, drones that can run forever. We have the death of Chilean journalist Gonzalo Lira in the custody of Ukraine. Yes, in the custody, I guess you could say. Some people would say he was taken hostage. Ukrainian farmland contamination due to exploded ordnance and minefields is going to contaminate probably 20% of Ukraine's richest, and Europe's, and the world for that matter, richest soils of the world are going to be contaminated, not only by depleted uranium rounds, but the countless amounts of munitions that have been exploded there, as well as mines. I'm going to show you an infographic that explains all of that. A congressperson has an admission about immigration and why they need it in order to keep enough human resources in the system so that we can continue to pay down our debts. We have the Texas issue with Border Patrol. We have Papua New Guinea descending into lawlessness and violence. And of course, the Ecuador situation is not improving one bit. So where should we begin? So this is a massive fire that you are seeing here. And this took place in St. Petersburg, Russia, where the temperatures are very cold right now, like they are here. Winter has finally come, minus 33 degrees. And I think that this was a statement. Kiev and the saboteurs who are currently at work in Moscow, they love these type of events because it makes for great optics. And what a coincidence that this happened when a Russian bombardment, I believe they put 11 Tu-95 bombers in the air, and they hit about 40 different Ukrainian targets, or 40 missiles were fired, and I think something like 33 or 34 of those made it through. So was this just a way to take attention away from that? Was this a cyber attack? There's a lot of turncoats. There's a lot of potential saboteurs that can easily blend in because, of course, Russians and Ukrainians are incredibly similar. A lot of them speak the same language. So was this an act of sabotage? I think it's probably pretty likely. I don't have the graphs here to show you, but the actual amount of fires inside of Russia, because the first thing I think of as a skeptical person when I see something like this, and so not to succumb to confirmation bias, is, okay, fires. Russia is a large country with, what, 140 million people now, if you include what they've annexed in Ukraine, maybe 150 million. And with 150 million people, you're going to have fires every day, everywhere. And maybe in Russia, the standards aren't quite as up to par as some other places around the world, so you can expect a few more. But as it turns out, there's actually around 3 times the amount of fires as there were before the war started. So we can almost guarantee that these are somehow related to the war, whether it's due to oversight, short staffing, possible just laws not being enforced, regulations not being enforced because they're working around the clock. They're working a lot of these factories 24/7, and they've been doing that for well over a year now. It's a possibility. So I think it was most definitely an act of sabotage, and it was quite the shocker for St. Petersburg's residents. As you can see here, just a massive fire. We're talking about 70,000 square meters, which I believe, if my math is not mistaken, equates to around 700,000 square foot facility. A massive facility. Again, my math could be a little off, but from what I hear, it's a 70,000 square meter facility because they're evolved there and they use the metric system. Okay, so we got to talk about what Lukashenko had to say, okay? I'm going to just read what he says, and you can come to your own interpretations and just pay very close attention to the body language here, okay? Now, let's just get right into this. Before we do this, so I want to give a shout out to Steve over at Wholesale Freeze-Dried Foods. They have started a new promotion for pizza because the government is stockpiling freeze-dried food. If you didn't know, for continuity of the government, for the embassies, for the Navy, for the nuclear submarines, the whole 9 yards, this is what the captains eat, okay? And you can exclusively get 15% off if you use the coupon code Canadian Prepper. But he sent me this freeze-dried pizza. And the first time I tried to rehydrate the pizza, it didn't work out for me so well because you have to steam it, and there's a way of doing it. But then I tried it. I was bold. And we're going to release a short because I was amazed. The staff here was completely amazed. We had some guests over who we were shooting a video with, and they tried it out. Completely amazing stuff. If you eat this dry, now remember, this is freeze-dried pizza, okay? This is going to last 25 years. Imagine everybody else is eating crickets and bugs and rat tails, and you're eating this. I'm going to take a bite just to show you I'm not lying. It tastes like Doritos, but it's real meat, real cheese. It's just delicious stuff. I would encourage you to try it out. You can get 15% off now. While supplies last. Now, you are supposed to rehydrate it, but the cool thing about it is it tastes great out of the bag. And when I've been doing my research throughout the day here, before I do the daily updates, I have a bag of this stuff at the ready, and it doesn't last long, which is problematic because I've been trying to stay lean. I've been trying to stay, you know, in a fast mode. But I tell you, man, this is like, I don't know, post-apocalyptic pizza chips. We got to give it some kind of nickname. But they have all kinds of stuff. They have a proprietary process where they can freeze dry whole meat pieces, steaks, pork chops, you name it. Best in the world. Go and check it out. You can get that exclusively with the Canadian Prepper coupon code for 15% off. Now, let's talk about what Lukashenko has to say. So I'm going to read this. We are in such a difficult situation today that it is like we're walking on thin ice, he says. A careless step and we could drown and cause harm to the state. Just notice his body language. Therefore, this year will be very difficult. According to all events, it should be very noisy, but we must do everything to make it quiet and calm. Facts indicate that there will be some turmoil in the world. You don't say. None of the powerful, especially the Americans, want such multipolarity. They want to rule the world as they did after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Ukraine, the Middle East, today the border of the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans, the Houthis, and others. You could look at the concerned faces of people in the crowd. They are demonstrative bombings only because elections are coming up in America and they need to show their heroism, how cool they are. I think what they're trying to do is create a situation so that it reaches its climax right before the election, which might in some way compel voters to keep the current government in office or the Republican of their choosing. I fear that this arc will continue across the Indian Ocean to Taiwan, he says. The whole planet could catch fire. This cannot be allowed. Think about what I said, but we have one task, peace and tranquility in our state. But he seems incredibly nervous. It's a very somber moment for the crowd. You can tell, I got the same sense when he gave a speech when the war was just beginning, before the arrival of the nuclear weapons into Belarus. The same consternation amongst his constituents and whoever he's giving this presentation to. You can see that people are very concerned there because they know that Belarus is going to be right in the crossfire of all of this. And this is what the Baltic states are preparing for. This is what Poland is preparing for. So this is just another shot of that scene in St. Petersburg. I mean, talk about apocalyptic. Wow, that is incredible. If you're a Russian, I mean, send me some messages and just let me know what the atmosphere is there. Like, what are people thinking? Are people concerned? Are people getting worried about, the war? Or is this just a part of Russian life? I've heard it said that Russia has a culture of suffering and they're accustomed to this sort of thing, but people have to be concerned that the shit is hitting the fan there, no? Or am I mistaken? So apparently in Epping, I'm not sure what state this was in, but there were multiple oil tankers on fire in the United States. Now, this is another coincidence that this happened on the exact same day as this big fire in St. Petersburg, okay? Now again, fires happen. It's like when the train derailment happened last year with the chemical spill, everybody was seeing train derailments everywhere. The reality is train derailments have been down significantly since 10 years ago. But we know now we're entering an era of a hybrid, gray zone, asymmetrical, guerrilla-style warfare, and we're going to see more of this stuff. We're going to see these saboteurs coming over the border and committing acts of arson, attacks on critical infrastructure, and the like. Next, we have a blackout in Rostov-on-Don. Okay?
Свободные сталкеры, ветераны и охотники, вырывайтесь в ряды долга. Защитить мир от заразы зоны – наша общая задача.
I don't know what they're saying there. I don't know if it's some kind of joke or...
Вот они, кто забрал электричество.
It appears to be some places that have electricity.
Там накрути, Сань. Накрути.
And remember, this is in the place that Evgeny Prigozhin first took over in his attempt at a coup in Russia. So the war is getting closer and closer to Russia, guys. We cannot sleep on this, okay? I understand that people are starting to think that it's never going to happen, but that would be the most foolish thing to think at this point in time. Now, around the Marshall Islands, where they conducted nuclear testing for many years, I believe there was around 67 nuclear tests conducted there. There has been a NOTAM, which is a acronym for a notice to airmen, which is basically a notice to aviators that they need to avoid this region, okay? Now, apparently, and I'll just briefly read the actual NOTAM, attention all aircraft operating in the vicinity of Kwajalein Atoll. For your safety, overflight of the island north of the RWY is prohibited. This is considered a hazardous area with the potential for loss of life. All arrivals and departures make south traffic only to avoid extreme radiation hazards. Contact to avoid extreme radiation hazard. I mean, what the hell is going on, guys? Contact-based operations, 126.2 within 50 nautical miles of Kwajalein Air Force. I don't even know what all these acronyms mean. OPS, blah, blah, blah. Departure to deconflict with the radiation hazard. Anyways, we got a radiation hazard, an undeclared, unexplained radiation hazard in this particular region. What the hell is going on with that? Who knows? Now, this gentleman here, what is his name again? Vladimir Zhirinovsky, okay? Now, these are predictions. This guy died, I believe, in, I think he died before the actual war started. Here's what he said. This is back in 2019 when he said this, okay? And usually, if a person gets a few failed predictions wrong, a lot of people don't take him seriously. He predicted the Ukraine war pretty much down to the month, years in advance. In 2024, he says there will be no election, and I think he's referring to Ukraine. There will be no country called Ukraine, when he was right about there not being an election because, of course, they've declared martial law, and for reasons of national security, they've decided to postpone the election. Sure. You don't take into account the situation in the Middle East. Remember, this is 2019. Such events will develop there that everyone will forget what is Ukraine. Talk about prescient. It's about the Third World War, he says. And Iran. This is not Vietnam and not North Korea and not Kosovo. I don't know. Here will be the scariest events. And there's another prediction presentation where he basically predicts what's going to happen with the Ukraine war. He says, I will give my prognosis, and then I'm going to tell you what is next. The events of the next 3 to 5 years is back in 2019 again. The Ukrainians will attack on Crimea and Donbass. Check. And we stand up to, in defense, we destroy the Ukrainian army, and at the same time, the Polish army helps them. Now, the Polish army has been helping them. NATO has been helping them, but not in the way that I think he envisioned, of course, as mercenaries in terms of providing them weapons and supplies. So not as to interfere with the territory of NATO countries. So we knew that if NATO got involved, it would be an immediate nuclear war, right? The Polish army also perishes, he says. So we haven't seen that yet. Then the German army joins in, which we are seeing. Goes on to say, there's a clash between the Germans and the Russian armies, which is insane because that's kind of happening, but only in the form of Leopard tanks and soon to be Taurus missiles and whatever other German weapons are currently being used by Ukrainians and mercenaries, many of them likely originating from Germany, United States, and all over the world. And so we're having that situation already play out. And we will agree on the division of Ukraine. He says the western regions will be called Galicia, the new state, lava, blah, 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 a bunch of words I don't understand. 5 territories which left Poland. This is a new state which joins both the EU. So basically he's saying that the Russians are going to take over 80% of Ukraine and that NATO is basically going to get the rest. Now, let's talk about some of his other more dire predictions that he makes, okay? So he believed that war was inevitable with Russia and Ukraine. He also believed that the partnerships with the Middle East and China for economic relations and control over terrorism and oil. Remember, this is back before any of this stuff happened, guys. The stability of the dollar and the energy market are key factors in the struggle for power, right? Because it's all about keeping the dollar pegged to the global oil trade. If that gets the boot, the dollar collapses. and the sphere of influence of the United States contracts markedly, with the role of the dollar being artificially maintained and its influence being reduced. Zhirinovsky predicted the war in Ukraine and the division of the country, with the bloodshed of Maidan being just the beginning of a series of terrible events. So this is, way back, right? Then he goes on to say his next predictions. Zhirinovsky predicts a nuclear war that will lead to the destruction of Ukraine, Southern Europe, and even America, with ground forces being thrown everywhere and money earned by America causing its collapse. Zhirinovsky's analysis of the war in Ukraine, which many initially laughed at, has proven to be accurate, highlighting the importance of understanding geopolitics. What was perceived as outrageous turned out to be just logic. Incredible. He predicted the shooting down of a passenger plane, Zelensky's presidency, and the destruction of Ukraine, with the possibility of America's collapse. I'm not sure which passenger plane. That might have been the one that got shot down over, was it Russia or Iran? Ukraine will collapse and cease to exist. We will be destroyed and collapse due to... Zhirinovsky predicts that Ukraine will be destroyed and U.S. will collapse due to nuclear war, with the country being submerged underwater within 24 hours. Now, I don't think these are Nostradamus-type predictions. I think these are based on prudent geopolitical analysis, because he's not like looking into a crystal ball or anything. He's not Rasputin, so I'm inclined to take him seriously. Not that I need that to give me any more reason to stay prepared. Now, apparently, according to the Russians now, must preface this by saying this is according to the Russians, Kiev is planning 2 possible false flag-style provocations or scenarios. The first is the shelling of one of the cities in the territory controlled by Zelensky in order to show the world a picture of destruction and blame the casualties on the civilian population on Russia. Okay, and remember, guys, this is from Russian media. Okay, so take it with a massive bag of salt. In other words, they need another atrocity 2.0. I'm not going to say the name because just saying it, the video might get flagged. The second is destructive attacks on a peaceful Russian city or terrorist action against that Zelensky views these 2 topics as pretty pictures that can be sold in the West in exchange for increased support. I guess maybe they're ruling out the prospect of a radiological nuclear style event, but they do think that we're going to see another massive provocation. Mind you, they've been saying that for some time now. North Korea has halted radio broadcasts, just another step in the complete decoupling and polarization between North and the South. People have no idea how on the razor's edge we are with respect to the Korean Peninsula. They're halting radio broadcasts, curbing exchanges with South, called for a decisive policy change in relation with the South in December. So it's dissolving organizations that were in charge of civilian exchanges as well with South Korea. The United Front Work Department is also expected to be dismantled. It seems an entire revamp of their outreach policy is underway. The new policy is expected to undoubtedly be more confrontational. Okay. Up next, we got Netanyahu. We're going to skip over that. Now, apparently, there are rumors that, not rumors, according to the Wall Street Journal, Israel is going to take over the Rafah border crossing, and Egypt is probably going to comply with them with this, although there is a concern that this could lead to civil unrest within Egypt. People who feel it's a breach of their sovereignty for Israel's troops to be managing their border crossing with the Gaza Strip. But this is something that now even mainstream media is reporting is about to happen. There have been several bombings, again, on the northern border with Lebanon, several cross-border skirmishes. The Houthis are doing all kinds of crazy displays of war games, simulating attacks on Israeli settlements. They're doing this, of course, in their own country. What are they really saying here? Are they going to partake alongside the militia groups operating out of Syria and Lebanon? How are they going to get there is another question. Are they going to be crossing the Strait of Hormuz, going through Iran, Iraq, into Syria, or are they going to be shuttling guys through the Red Sea? It's anybody's best guess, but the U.S. and Britain have continued with their airstrikes, which have been largely insignificant in the grand scheme of things. According to the Houthis, they claim that these attacks are simply targeting places that the US and the UK has targeted before, places that are not really essential for the Houthis' current operations that involve trying to bring traffic through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait to a grinding halt. This is a report from Null Reports, and this is a confession because this is typically a very pro-Ukrainian account. And if they're admitting that they weren't even able to shoot down S-300s, they weren't even able to shoot down Shahed drones, I'm not sure if these are the new modified ones, which are faster and more stealthy, none of the Kinzhal ballistic missiles. They were able to intercept the KH-101, 7 of 12, so they claim. None of the anti-ship missiles, none of the anti-radar, and only 1/4 of the KH-59 cruise missiles. So it was a bad day for Ukraine. Thank God they had that St. Petersburg fire to take attention away from the story. Estonia is wanting to place anti-personnel mines along the border with Russia. An MP is calling for the placement of mines along the border. This, of course, as Germany and many other countries plan on reinforcing these Baltic state countries with regiments of troops, brigades of troops. I believe Germany is going to be sending 5,000 troops, which is not big in the grand scheme of things, but of course it's just likely the tip of the spear, and we're going to see a lot more of that in the near future. Europe is undoubtedly on the brink of war. There is no question about it. And people are going to look back at this time, I think, as time when they could have prepared, but they weren't taking the threats seriously. And I have a big video coming up where I talk about the psychology of preparedness and complacency and the normalcy bias, and I put a lot of work into that one, so I look forward to people at least taking a look at it. Now, this is a potential explosive ordnance contamination across Ukraine and priority agricultural oblasts for clearance, okay? So I think anything in orange and red is like territories with confirmed and suspected explosive ordnance and contamination. Some of the richest farmland, okay, has been contaminated, as you can see. 20% they're saying has been contaminated with suspected exploded ordnance. This is the breadbasket of Europe. The richest soils in the world, 4 meters of topsoil, is currently just being completely destroyed. So even if we can grow stuff here, do we want food that is grown from here, or are Europeans going to want it? I mean, what sort of heavy metals and all kinds of crap are going to be present in that garbage? We also have to talk about, so I'm not sure if you guys heard about this. Nuclear battery produces power for 50 years without needing to charge. And apparently, they are saying that this is past the prototype phase, and they're getting ready to already go into mass production. Betavolt says that battery could power mobile phones that never need to be charged and drones that can fly forever. Now, this is never going to get into the hands of civilians. And for the simple reason that that would put a potential dirty bomb in the hand of every civilian. So what is this technology going to be used for? Because this is one of the biggest problems when we're looking at automation and robotics and the Spot robot, is that the battery life is abysmal, especially with drones. I mean, you're lucky to get an hour on some of the best drones, okay? Unless you're talking like a big drone with a massive battery, and the bigger the battery, the heavier it is, the more, it cuts into the flight time. But if you have this and you have batteries, we're really talking about a Terminator scenario here. Because if you recall in the movie The Terminator, there were nuclear batteries that powered the T-800. So we're literally living out a Hollywood movie. It's unbelievable that right around the time that the robots are about to make an appearance, they just suddenly develop nuclear batteries. Go figure. And you can bet that the only people who are going to be allowed to use them are the government with their Gestapo jackboot thug robots. Now this is interesting. This is, I'm not sure if this is a congressperson. Who is this here? This is Jerry Nadler, spoke boldly in mitigation of the border crisis, okay? Now, I got to agree with him here, and this is something I've been saying for the longest time. They need immigration because your birth certificate is very much like a piece of collateral for the bankers, in that the more human resource is, like, every birth certificate is guaranteed to pay at least a certain amount of tax throughout its lifetime. So they're really meal tickets for the elites, these birth certificates, right? So the more people, the more human resources. Yes, immigrants might be a burden for the first 2 to 5 years of coming into a new country. But after that, they start paying taxes, they start contributing. And when you have a economy that's based on a perpetual debt bubble that you continuously have to service, well, you need to continuously increase the GDP. The only way you can do that is continue to broaden the tax base, increase the amount of energy in the system, which we all know is going to get more and more expensive, especially if you're talking about people having faith in US dollars. You need more debt collateral on the other end of things. So let's just hear what he has to say, okay? He pissed a lot of people off when he said this, but I just got to say, I mean, he's right.
And we need immigrants in this country. Forget the fact that the farm, that our vegetables would rot in the ground if they weren't being picked by many immigrants, many illegal immigrants. The fact is that the birth rate in this country is way below replacement level, which means our population is going to start shrinking. And the ratio of people on Social Security and Medicare is going to increase relative to the number of people supporting them.
So as much as people don't want to hear that, he's not wrong. The birth replacement rates are too low in almost every Western country. Japan is on the brink of collapse. I think there's like 0.7 people are born for every 2. So within the next 40 years, that population is going to be cut well below half. The problem is that it's an aging population, and that means you have a lot more people who aren't paying taxes. So the burden of looking after those people, like he's saying, on Social Security, and they're worried about their Social Security because this guy ain't no spring chicken by the looks of him, meaning that he's concerned about, well, who's gonna, foot the bill for my lifestyle in the next 30 years while I try to stay alive as long as I can. So this is going to be a big problem, and this is why people need to start having more children. But good luck convincing people of that when everything in our society is tailored toward being individualist, being anti-family, not having children. It's all about me, everything for yourself, being entirely selfish. And this is why the civilization is bound to collapse unless the robots with the nuclear-powered batteries swoop in at the last moment and save the day. I guess that's what Mr. Nadler is going to be banking on. What else do we got to talk about here? Okay, so Canadian uranium stocks rallied on Friday as the world's biggest miner of nuclear fuel warned it may miss production targets for up to 2 years. Now, there's this new refound interest in nuclear power that we're seeing around the world. Obviously, because people are concerned about the supply of petrofuels. So this makes me wonder, is part of this due to the new nuclear arms race that we're experiencing? We know that 3 countries, and quite possibly 4, are planning on restarting nuclear testing. We know that the United States is getting ready to do a complete overhaul of its nuclear arsenal. These types of refined fissionable materials is going to put stress on the global uranium market for nuclear fuels. And of course, when you have a lot of new countries emerging in this new multipolar world, they're likely going to want to expand their nuclear arsenals. So there is a mad dash into nuclear at this point in time. And I think a lot of it is because maybe some of the supply is being sucked up for purposes that are not civilian in nature, and in fact are for countries to build up their nuclear arsenal. We know that the United States was stockpiling enriched uranium that they were purchasing from the Russians last year in anticipation of being cut off of those supplies this year. The contract is ending, and we're about to see the Iron Curtain separate the United States and the former Soviet state Russia once again. This is Gonzalo Lira's. He was the Chilean journalist. We've done videos about old Coach Red Pill before. I've talked about how he should just have kept his mouth shut. But, I always thought that maybe there was a part of him who had a bit of a death wish. And unfortunately, this is what happened. So he sent a letter to, I think, his sister that he has double pneumonia in both lungs and a severe case of edema. Of course, the U.S. State Department did nothing to help him, as far as we know. They are now claiming, though, that they offered him help and he refused, that he called somebody a fascist and stormed out of the room. So it's hard to know. I mean, I don't believe the State Department. I don't believe the propagandist who caught him, and there was no reason why the U.S. government couldn't just say, hey, bring this guy back. And the reason why I think this is such an important story is because this was a guy who was in Ukraine, speaking his mind, speaking truth to power, if you will, in what was supposed to be a democracy at the time, and basically prove that it wasn't. At least during wartime, it wasn't. Now, they claim that he was giving up secrets about certain people and blah, blah, blah. But I think it came down to the fact that he had a lot of names that when you have names that most people don't know, and you're saying that they're involved in crime, that's when you have to look out. I mean, it's fine for you to come on here and say Bill Gates is going to do this, and Epstein and Clinton and all the big names. That's fine. He had names of people who, the real gangsters behind the scenes running things, and I'm pretty sure that's why they scooped him up, all right? But he had every opportunity to leave the country, and, why not just go to Poland, go to Russia, and do what you were doing while you were in Ukraine? He was independently wealthy. He could have done it unless there was something else he was running from. Anyways, rest in peace, Coach Red Pill Gonzalo Lira. Scientists to deliver a warning about nuclear war with the Doomsday Clock 2024 announcement. We're going to have a special guest on next week that's going to coincide with the Doomsday Clock announcement. He's quite critical of the Doomsday Clock being a true barometer for how close we are to nuclear Armageddon. And I would generally have to agree that this is typically leveraged for political purposes, and it's not really intended to be taken seriously. But what it does do is it gets the public thinking about preparedness. And I think, at least at this point in time, however we can do that, whether it's by people watching channels like My Self-Reliance, just for therapy, and then suddenly stumbling upon the interviews that we did with him, trying to remind them of the importance of, well, it's not just about, going into the woods for leisure's sake. It's about what are you going to do when the grid goes down. So I do think that things like this have merit, but there are some skeptics who think that either this is overblown or that it's not severe enough, and that there's a reason why they've been so conservative since the beginning of the Ukraine war in terms of moving the clock closer to midnight. Recall, before the war started in Ukraine, it was 100 seconds to midnight. Before the war started. Now we have everybody pretty much in the know who knows exactly what's going on, saying that this is the closest we've ever been to nuclear war ever on multiple fronts, and they only move the clock 10 seconds closer to midnight. So that kind of tells you maybe we shouldn't be taking this thing that seriously, right? These are just some protests that are currently taking place in Israel in order to ouster Benjamin Netanyahu. However, I don't think even getting rid of Netanyahu is necessarily going to be something that's going to benefit Gazans, Palestinians. These are protests which are effectively advocating for more military intervention into the Gaza Strip, which is only going to make matters worse in the Middle East. There is undoubtedly a war coming with Iran. Okay, we all need to prepare for the price of oil to go through the roof. We're really on the precipice of everything falling apart. Okay, the Taiwan elections have now been decided in the favor of an independent candidate who is going to be anti-China all the way. He's going to welcome in Western weapons. So we're going to see conflict on that front. We could very well see more disruptions in the global commercial waterways, which is going to drive up inflation. Once again, it's going to mess with the global supply chain. So I know that we're beating a dead horse when we warn people about the risks that are on the horizon, but we're going to look back at this period of time and say to ourselves, man, we had every opportunity to prepare, and I simply don't think that you can prepare enough at this stage of the game, okay? So make that extra Costco run. Make sure you go and check out wholesale freeze-dried food, freeze-dried pizza. You won't be disappointed to buy gold, okay? Because they know, and I'll just read this last because I know a lot of people that worry the price of gold isn't moving that much. Be thankful that it's not moving that much, because the closer gold goes to 3,000, the closer we are to the proverbial end of days. Russia and China understand that it will be impossible for the U.S. to repay its enormous debt. Of course. The West has been trying to drive global prices down, global gold prices down, while Russia and China are taking advantage of that strategy, okay? China and Russia realize the real value of gold and see fiat currencies such as the dollar and euro as poker chips that one cannot cash out at the end of the game. Poker chips. And that's so simple, but it's so eloquently put. Yes, that's indeed what is happening. So Russia and China are stockpiling gold. In Canada, the bank here doesn't even have gold for some reason. But I would encourage you to consider precious metals and diversifying. I personally don't have a lot of precious metals, but if I was a very high net worth individual, a lot of people think I am. Unfortunately, I am not. The wealth I do have, I try to put it into stuff and land, okay? But if you do have a lot of excess net worth and the lights go out and the grid goes down for a prolonged period of time, all those ones and zeros and commas in the bank ain't going to mean nothing. Possession is going to be 9/10 of the law, and what is within arm's reach is all you're going to be able to claim ownership of at that time. So consider diversification if you can. Thanks for watching, guys. Canadian Prepper out.